So I'm joined now by Mark Coles, who is our head of technical regulations here at the IoT, to just have a chat about how the pandemic's affecting everything to do with the wiring regulations. So Mark, just give us a quick overview of what you actually do at the IET.
So I'm head of technical regulations at the IET, and what I'm responsible for is essentially getting BS 7671 out the door, and not just BS 7671, of course. There's the whole suite of guidance publications that the IET publishes. 20 or so publications on the periphery of BS 7671. Of course, that's the guidance notes 128, on-site guide, etc. So yes, there's about 20 publications on the back of BS 7671.
And why did people start developing standards in the first place? What was the point of it all?
It's that whole thing about square peg, round hole. If you want a wheel for your car, you go to a motor factor. I want a wheel. It gives you a steering wheel, but actually you wanted a wheel for the car to drive on. So you need the right terminology, hence you need to standardise on the terminology. We all need something, and if you remember, there were discussions early on about AC and DC. Should we go AC? Should we go DC? And then about the voltage, the frequency of the voltage. Here we have 50 hertz. The States has 60 hertz. So it's all about a common need. We need to come together. We need to have the same voltages. We need to have the same frequencies. And that's why you need to standardise then on a common agreement. But then it's buy-in. So once you get the buy-in of all of one country, you need the buy-in of other countries. And hence that's why standardisation becomes a global thing, that you need a piece of equipment. And I'll pick up my iPhone here. You need a piece of equipment that works across borders. So hence you need to have a standard agreed with other countries for that equipment to work across those borders. And of course, it becomes global.
So the wiring regulations are there to be able to standardise across the world. How does that actually sort of happen in reality? What are the mechanisms of creating that standardisation? Experts
from all countries are appointed. And I would say all countries interested in international standardisation from an electrical point of view. And from an electrical point of view, it's IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission. And what happens is interested countries, those that want to participate in international standardisation, will send an expert into that meeting that's being held on that particular subject. And then you get the experts sitting around a table, and it becomes a democracy, if you like, that you get general agreement, and that's the way that the standard goes. The standard then is published internationally, which can be seen by all countries, but then it goes down into the regions like Europe, like Australasia, North America, and they put their tweaks on it, and then it goes into individual countries, like we take it in from Senelec, for example.
We see that things progress every sort of 3-4 years. There's a new edition of the wiring regulations. Why is it so frequent?
Because advancements are made, new information is gathered, more data is collected, and that leads on to developments in standardisation. Actually, we had that back then. Oh, look, something's come along. This could make things better. This can make things easier, safer, and more efficient. And that's why standards need to be reviewed regularly, and that's why standards, therefore, are updated regularly.
And presumably, things like, autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles and those kind of things, and then solar panels that came out sort of, 15, 20 years ago in terms of houses. Have they all made a big impact then on how the electrical industry has had to standardise?
Massive, because you think about it, how it's been for, well, let's say up to 20 years ago, when as you mentioned, PV was first seen more readily 20 years ago, let's say. But up to that point, our houses were fed from a grid. And that grid is an electrical distribution system across the country. And at local level, we have a distribution system commonly under the pavements in the street, but could be overhead. We each had one electrical supply usually into our dwellings. But as time's gone on, we've got more electrical supplies to consider. We've got a supply from PV on the roof. We might have had a wind turbine. We might have battery storage, heat pumps, which are becoming more and more popular. But also with electric vehicles, you might drive your electric vehicle to work, charge it at work, drive it home, plug it in, charge your batteries in the house. So all these are sources, whereas we had one source of electricity 20 years ago, now we've got many. And with having different sources, they need to coexist with each other, and they need to interact. So if you have a fault on a system somewhere, they all need to see that fault and react accordingly.
Has the pandemic affected you? Are you getting through it? Is the next edition going to happen? What's been going on in the world of standardisation and for the IET?
Well, from the IET's point of view, condolences to all those people that have lost family members and friends at this horrific time. How has it affected our work? Well, we're all under lockdown. We're fortunate from our point of view. We can work from home, and once we've got a good internet connection, we can work anywhere. So that works from our point of view. Now, within our department, for example, we're working on an amendment for 2022. So at the moment, it's business as usual. So that's how it's been working. It's harder to have a technical discussion when you've got a chat room of perhaps 20, 30 people when everybody wants to get their point over. That is something that we really haven't bottomed out. But the general items on an agenda we've been able to get through. Now, you mentioned about international standardisation. Yes, we had a meeting 2 days ago, which was an IEC meeting, TC 64, Technical Committee 64, and there were probably 64 people on that call. It is tricky at times, and it's not the best way of doing things, but it's certainly working. How this is going to develop in the future, who knows? We can only wait and see. But as I mentioned, we're working on a project for 2022. All the external experts, committee members that we would normally deal with are all involved and all online. So at the moment, it is business as usual, but with a slightly different slant.
Is the possibility then that the frequency of these publications will stretch a little bit if we all have to do less travel, or will the international industry that's behind all of these standardizations and things that are going on effectively work out a way of doing it remotely? I mean, do you see there being longer time frequencies in the future?
I don't really, on the face of it, I don't really, because as I mentioned, standards evolve and standards change and they need to be reviewed every so often. So I can't see that changing.
One of the things that sort of disappeared from the media over the last 3-4 months with the pandemic arriving is the arrival of Brexit and that big thing that was on everybody's minds. How is Brexit going to actually affect us? And with the pandemic as well, is that a double whammy?
I don't think so. Again, we still need standards to work to. The equipment we have in our houses, for instance, we buy a TV. Those TVs are made to be sold across borders, across Europe, perhaps the world. The laptops that we use, you look at the power supplies. I'm looking around for my power supply, but it's hidden under the desk. But the power supply, you look at it, it's got a voltage on it, except a voltage between 100 volts and 250 commonly. So that means you can take that across the world. So standards will still need to be developed for items of equipment that will need to sell across borders. Now, granted, within Europe, what we commonly see with our consumer units, for example, they're made to a British standard. Our circuit breakers are made to, ours are BSEN 60898, for example. The EN part means it's European. I can't see that changing. There might be more scope in the future to work with countries like the United States, which we don't use American standards, for instance, within the UK, but there might be scope to look at what they're doing, and we might see more American standards or standards of other parts of the world outside of Europe coming in to what we see on a daily basis. But of course, there are things like within Europe, we have the low voltage directive, for instance, equipment that needs to work to a low voltage, which is essentially up to 1,000 volts. But we need to meet that because we're selling equipment across borders. So I can't see standardization really for us changing that much in the short term.
And there was a big fear sort of at the start of Brexit that we wouldn't be able to be part of CENELEC. But I think that's changed, hasn't it?
BSI is the UK recognised standards body, and BSI is the member of CENELEC and also of IEC. Now, CENELEC itself sits outside of Europe. Of course, it consists of European countries, but it's a private organisation in itself, and it gets the buy-in of other countries. Now, countries like, and I might get some of this wrong, Norway, Switzerland, and even Liechtenstein are not part of the European Economic Region. Excuse me, I get my terminology right. But nevertheless, they participate in European standardisation. And that's how BSI, ourselves, the IET, see that working. Now, BSI had some buy-in from the government that there would be a 2-year period for it to continue working in European standardisation and get government support, again, for about a 2-year period, my cohorts in the standards that we're involved with and committee work that we're involved with, we see that continuing for the foreseeable future.
Why is it so frequent that we update the wine regs? Is there a way of perhaps doing it on a more slower scale? They always seem to be asking the question, does it really need to happen?
Well, as I pointed out earlier, standards on which BS 7671 is based, they change. And because those standards change, we have a period where we need to implement those changes. Because it's a British standard, BS 7671, a British standard, there's a requirement to review that standard at regular intervals. And also reviewing at regular intervals, we need then to look at the standards on which BS 71 relies upon. BS 7671, as I mentioned, cites other British standards within it, BSENs that is, and also IEC documents. When they change, we need to incorporate those changes within BS 7671, and that's the reason why BS 7671 is amended. Some would say so frequently, others would say not.